Before we get down to the nitty-gritty, I want to thank my animators Adam Midzuk, or Kuzim, and Tyler Addison for the animations in this video. If you like their work, consider following them on Twitter. Links in the description and comment section below. Now, on with the show. What comes to your mind when you hear the word dinosaur? Tyrannosaurus, Triceratops, Brontosaurus, Stegosaurus, Raptor? What comes to your mind when you hear the word bird? Eagle, hawk, parrot, stork, owl? For those people so obsessed with past life they spend their lives trying to figure out its clues, the general public's ideas on what a dinosaur really is can seem myopic and downright boring. The fact of the matter is, every single organism, past or present, alive or dead, brings with it a sense of wonder. The reasons why forms like Diplodocus, Ankylosaurus, or Spinosaurus are so famous and known worldwide are quite obvious. Even though the paleo nuts have their own unique favorite prehistoric animal, the archetypical dinosaur shapes we've known since we were kids are archetypical for a reason. Velociraptor is chief among these archetypes and deserves the amount of attention it gets. It helped to start a revolution after all. I'll save my Jurassic Park bashing for another video, but unfortunately I have to mention it. It was the first really big budget, really big box office hit to include dinosaurs, and to include them in the best, most realistic way a movie had ever done, and may ever do. For anyone who respects science as the process by which we come to answers for the world in which we live, and for anyone with any interest in life of the past, we need to recognize that media and pop culture are static. The way dinosaurs were reconstructed at one time is based on how many, but not all, experts at the time suspected they may have appeared. As time progresses, we should look at past pieces of pop culture which depict past life as stepping stones to giving the public a better, clearer image of such past life. That being said, Jurassic Park got Velociraptor totally wrong, even for the time, for a myriad of reasons, and we should all get over it. History of discovery. How the raptor got its wings. Like many archetypical dinosaurs, Velociraptor was found early on in the history of paleontology. Velociraptor was not the first raptor dinosaur to be found, but it became the poster child for the group due to pop culture influences and the immense wealth of fossil finds uncovered throughout the early 20th century. During this period, there were only a few preeminent science institutions, even fewer specialized in paleontology. The American Museum of Natural History in New York was one of them. Like most of these early pioneer establishments, it has remained an important player to this day. Same goes for the Smithsonian Institution, the Natural History Museum of London, and more. As one of the top museums with proper funding, it led many expeditions from the 1900s to the 1950s, bringing back priceless artifacts and data which played a direct role in development of the understanding of past and present life. Our little friend Velociraptor is a part of this history. The museum and the dinosaur are incontrovertibly linked with the guy who named the beast, Henry Fairfield Osborn. Osborn was an American geologist and paleontologist active during the early 1900s. His importance lies in his numerous descriptions of fossil animals, and his 25-year-long position as president of the American Museum of Natural History. Henry was characterized as a first-rate science administrator and a third-rate scientist, as many of his views on race were and are wholly unscientific, and were heavily shrouded in racism and bigotry. Osborn was absolutely convinced humans arose from Asia and not Africa. A common view at the time felt heredity was more important and perhaps superior to the environment as an influence in the evolution of organisms. To this end, it was believed humans were composed of several species, divided by race, with fixed hereditary traits. Most scientists subscribing to these ludicrous ideas placed their own race, namely the Caucasians, at the top, followed by other races as increasingly primitive. The Nazis would later latch on to this justification for personal inferiority as one of the major tenets of their ideology. As Osborn held these views, he was most interested in understanding the human fossil record. It was his fascination with proving the white race as superior that led him to Mongolia. With his sights set where he thought there might be ancient human ancestors between ape and human, sponsors were called, monies were riled up, and a series of missions called the Central Asiatic Expeditions set sail for the rusty wilderness of Mongolia. Unfortunately for the extremely racist eugenicist, and fortunately for the history of dinosaur science, human remains were not to be found. Far from it. The dude who led most of these expeditions went by the name of Roy Chapman Andrews. If you could pick one individual to personify everything one associates with adventurism and exploration of the natural world, Andrews would be that person. Though more fiction than fact, many like to attribute Roy Chapman Andrews to the real-life inspiration of Indiana Jones. Roy's career took him from the deck of a ship which patrolled the East Indies for reptiles and mammals, to filming seals in the Arctic while on the hunt for a whale specimen, and eventually to the blistering basins of the Gobi Desert. No human remains were ever found during these expeditions. The closest they got were mammals from before the age of man. Additionally, the long-necked rhinos called Andrichotheres, the single and only known skull of the bizarre Andrewsarchus, and some mastodon fossils were uncovered. More notably, these expeditions also uncovered hundreds of fossils of animals from the Cretaceous period, sheep-sized horned dinosaurs, big-bodied small-crested hadrosaurs, and a slew of wacky theropods. In 1923, on one of the first expeditions to the Gobi Desert of Mongolia, 3 theropod specimens were uncovered from a deposit of red sandstone. One specimen was of a crushed but amazingly complete skull and a finger and claw bone. It was found lying alongside the skull of the early ceratopsian dinosaur, Protoceratops. The second specimen was a foot and a long, thin skull, missing a few bits and pieces. The third specimen was of a short, stocky skull, some neck vertebrae, and an arm. Though the second and third specimens are important, especially for the study of dinosaurs, the first specimen is what I want to focus in on. This 17.6 cm, 6.9 inch skull is low and slender, with many small serrated teeth. The claw tipping the finger bone was dangerously recurved and like that of a bird of prey. At the time of this discovery, most theropod dinosaurs were lumped together into either the group Megalosauria or subgroup Megalosauridae. What we know of today as the Tyrannosaurs, Dromaeosaurs, Therizinosaurs, Spinosaurs, and Ornithomimosaurs weren't yet situated. They wouldn't get sorted for many decades more. Therefore, the lithe remains of the little theropod found in the wastes of the Gobi were considered to belong to a megalosaurid dinosaur. Since Henry Fairfield Osborn was the guy who sanctioned the expeditions, and since he was the president of the museum, he was also the one who described most of the remains found during the Central Asiatic expeditions. It was his observations and descriptions of these beasts which provided the blueprint for these theropods for decades to come. The remains were given the name Velociraptor mongoliensis, meaning swift Caesar of Mongolia. Osborn characterized the remains of Velociraptor as an animal that couldn't help but go fast. Irregular gaps between each of the dozen or so teeth suggested to the natural historian that Velociraptor was perfectly adapted to quickly snap at and hold onto small, swift prey items. The finger and claw associated with the skull were so flat and curvy, it was thought they would have been especially helpful in holding on to prey. To wrap up the whole package of the first Velociraptor specimen, Osborn noted the long snoot and wide gape of the jaws might mean it could also crunch and munch on live prey of considerable size. The skull is now extremely well known as a specimen. It's been reconstructed and cast probably on the order of millions of times over the decades since its discovery, and was very likely the specimen I used to tease this episode on Twitter. Even if you've never seen Velociraptor remains in person, you've definitely seen this skull. Many an online comment thread has begun with some nitwit flaunting their opinion that paleontology, or at least the online echo chamber forums they are a part of, should remain apolitical. Unfortunately for these folks who want to remain naive, paleontology and politics have been intertwined for a long time. Among the many ways are societally, in the racism justified by extremely flawed unscientific methods, and physically, when certain political upheavals or historic events prevented scientists from doing their work. I've already pointed out Henry Fairfield Osborn's Nazi tendencies, and now comes the arbitrary barriers to science afforded by politics. Political barriers to fossil finds are common throughout the history of paleontology. The history of study of Velociraptor was no exception. As difficult as it was to drum up the Central Asiatic expeditions of the 20s and 30s, it became a near political impossibility a few years after the Americans had left the Gobi. Soviet Russia helped Mongolia regain its independence from China in the mid-1920s. This led to Soviet Russia supporting the establishment of a communist government in Mongolia. Now that Mongolia was communist, the USSR inserted itself into the Mongolian sciences. These events kept everyone out of Mongolia, so no more American trips to raid the lands of Mongolia of their fossils. Several joint Mongolian and Russian expeditions to the Gobi were made in the years before World War II. These excursions helped build the foundations for later expeditions, which would find more specimens of our favorite speed thief. They identified additional outcrops of the Gobi, mapped more of the area, and figured out where more fossil-bearing layers might be found. World War II put a stop to these expeditions, but more started up in the relative peace that followed. Cooperation between Chinese and Russian scientists in the decades after World War II helped explore more of the Gobi Desert, which lay outside the borders of Mongolia. Non-Soviet countries found it very difficult to make it back to Mongolia, so the American Museum of Natural History would stay out of the country for a good chunk of time. The next group of scientists to take a crack at the fossils hidden in the Gobi were the Polish. In the 1960s, a team of Mongolian and Polish scientists were assembled to build upon the work of past explorers. This resulted in another series of expeditions, three three-year stints separated by a year, starting with 1963, 64, and 65, then 1967, 68, and 69, and ending with 1970 and 71. It was during the 1971 expedition that the next specimen of Velociraptor was found. To find any remains of prehistoric life is a game of chance. The more complete the fossil, the bigger the game. The next specimen of Velociraptor was a complete skeleton, entirely fleshing out the body of the critter beyond anyone's wildest dreams. On top of that, the new specimen was preserved embracing another complete skeleton of the hornless horned dinosaur Protoceratops. Yes, the second ever Velociraptor was the fighting dinosaur specimen. Not only does it preserve the entire anatomy of the theropod, it also preserves predator-prey behavior between two species, 70 million years after it happened. To steal a bit from Dr. Dave Hone,
a complete T-Rex is all very well and very useful and interesting and fundamentally cool, I'm happy to admit. But some things are so incredibly rare and unlikely to preserve that to have them as fossils is mind-blowing.
These apparent adversaries were carefully excavated from a layer of yellowy-orange sandstone rock, which dates to the Cretaceous period. The cause of death for these two has been a debate in the years after its discovery, as it's not as clear-cut as you'd think. The Velociraptor has its foot claw jammed into the neck area of the herbivore, while the Protoceratops has its beaked jaws firmly clamped down on the raptor's arm. The Velociraptor's other arm is hooked onto the other side of the Protoceratops' head. The exact chain of events which led to their demise is unknown, but it's currently widely accepted that a sand dune shifted at the right place and right time to completely cover the two, killing them in the process. Dr. Mark Norrell of the American Museum of Natural History in New York suggests a dune near the pair prior to their deaths was destabilized by previous rains. Since the region was deserty even in the Cretaceous, monsoons would pour so much water all over the sand fields and dunes that the grains of sand would move like water if they collapsed at the right place. Animals preserved in their burrows from similar collapsing sands have been found at other dig sites in the region. This provides correlation between a liquid dune cause and quick death result. It makes sense that the two skeletons would remain in exactly the poses they had when they died, if they were immediately covered in sand. That cause of death would explain exactly how their bodies remained suspended in their death poses long enough for their soft tissue to decompose and their bones to fossilize. If the sand didn't crush them to death, then drowning in it did. What a way to go. Between 1988 and 1990, another series of expeditions were taken to the Gobi, this time a joint venture between Chinese and Canadian scientists. These expeditions, called the SinoCanadian Dinosaur Project, set out to improve the paleontological knowledge of both Canada and the parts of the Gobi Desert residing in China. One of these excursions in the Gobi measured and described a layer of red sandstone called the Bayan Mendahu Red Beds. This layer is important as its age is roughly equivalent to a layer called the Judokta Formation, both of which are in different parts of the Gobi Desert. The paper describing the findings, published in 1993, explains how this layer of rock represents a semi-arid environment, controlled more by the wind than by water. Among the many fossil remains uncovered during these expeditions were the bones of Velociraptor. The presence of the theropod was noted and some material was collected, but it remains unprepared or undescribed. Another expedition began in 1990 and ended in 1993. But this time, the Americans got back a piece of the action, teaming up with the Mongolians to get some more tasty dino bits. Asiatic expeditions to Electric Boogaloo went rather well, with many specimens confidently attributed to Velociraptor, as well as some not so confidently Velociraptor. Both the American Museum of Natural History of New York and the Mongolia Academy of Sciences uncovered several well-preserved skeletons. One of these, IGM 10980, is unusually well preserved. This skeleton was discovered by Dr. Mark Norell on July 5th during the 1990 field season. Over the next few days, the team helped uncover it only to find it missing its head. I could only find one image of the specimen, and it ain't a great one, so I'll have to describe it for you. Nicknamed Ichabod craniosaurus after the headless horseman of literature, it's said to be extremely well preserved with almost all of the postcranial material, like the torso, legs, arms, and tail. Just no head. It's rather mysterious as its last known whereabouts was New York, presumably the American Museum of Natural History, since that was the institution which was part of the expedition, but it's not mentioned as the repository in the book Dinosaurs of the Flaming Cliffs by Michael Novacek. Addendum. Since the writing of this video, the specimen known as Ichabod craniosaurus has been both described and named. Dr. Alan Turner, Shana Montanari, and Dr. Mark Norell described the remains as Shri Devi. It was a very close relative of Velociraptor, but differed in the development of the foot muscles, and the neck vertebrae were a bit different. Oh, it's funny, I was writing this video and this section on the mysteriousness of the specimen when I found an image of it. I gave that information to paleo artist King Rexy as he was doing his series on named specimens. A few days or weeks later, he got to making his art of the headless theropod, and then it was officially published a day or so later. Many other theropod remains, like Velociraptor, were found during these early 90s expeditions, but only a few are as noteworthy. IGM 10985 is a specimen uncovered during the 1993 field season, and includes a three-dimensionally preserved skeleton of what might be Velociraptor, but is also missing a head. It's currently referred to the Dromaeosaur family, but probably does represent a Velociraptor or close relative. It was found on the surface in the same death pose its body made when it was buried, with its legs tucked underneath the body. This one comes from the Judokta Formation, making it from the same time as most Velociraptor specimens. Though it was missing a complete attached skull, some pieces of it were found downslope. This raptor is considered by its descriptors as an immature animal due to unfused cracks in the bones. This individual was scavenged by arthropods between death and burial, evidenced by 1 centimeter holes bored through the sternum and pelvis. 3 more sizable specimens were uncovered during the Americans' jaunt in the desert and are worthy of discussion. Since it's technically illegal to take specimens outside of Mongolia, the specimens named IGM 10976, IGM 10986, and IGM 10982 were kept in Mongolia, despite being found as part of the American and Mongolian expedition. IGM 10976 was found in 1991 and is a nearly complete skull and the front half of the skeleton, including a wishbone, which are quite rare in most dinosaur fossils. The bones of IGM 10976 are also punctured by arthropod borings. The researchers who described the wishbone of this specimen in 2011 noted that this specimen likely represents an adult individual, as it's just a tad larger than most velociraptor specimens, and the neck ribs have fully fused to the centra of the vertebrae. IGM 10986 was found in 1993 at the Chimney Buttes locality. It's a partial skeleton found together in the ground, but also includes a bunch of fragments that were floating on top of the sediment. The skeleton included an articulated tail, left and right feet and hind limbs, an articulated pelvis with neck and thoracic vertebrae, a scapulocoracoid, and fragmentary forelimb elements. The rocks that held the specimen are very similar to the Flaming Cliffs, where many velociraptors are found. Thirdly, IGM 10982 was found in 1995 at the Flaming Cliffs locality. Like the others, this specimen is a really good one. It provides us with a skull, a neck, a torso, some arm bones, the pelvis, some leg bones, and the beginning of the tail. Its head and neck are bent backwards over its torso in a death pose. This guy also has some really nicely preserved hand talons. You know how Oviraptor was named Egg Thief because the discoverers found one atop a nest of eggs and just kind of assumed it was eating them before it died? You know how that's BS and the eggs belonged to Oviraptor? Well, that was cleared up by many studies, principal of which was one by the same team of paleontologists that did the 90s expeditions. Though they found some velociraptor remains, they also found fossils of a bunch of other critters like Oviraptor. One such specimen was another adult Oviraptor skeleton atop a nest of eggs. This specimen happened to preserve embryonic remains of the babies inside an egg, positively correlating this egg type to the Oviraptor dinosaur. This then proved that a lot of the eggs found with Protoceratops remains in the 1920s Central Asiatic expeditions were actually theropod eggs, not ceratopsian ones. In this newer mama unscrambled egg fossil, 2 skulls of a dromaeosaurid theropod were also found amongst the eggs. These 2 skulls can't be totally identified down to the genus or species level, but they share a lot in common with Velociraptor. The 2 noggins belonged to very young animals, probably just about to hatch or just hatched. The authors of the paper describing these specimens didn't make any conclusions on why they are in the same nest, but explanations were thrown out, including that they were nest parasites, they were the mom's prey for the babies, or they were part of the predator pack that started to eat the eggs of the Oviraptor. So now there's Velociraptor chick fossils. Another expedition to the Gobi was launched from 1995 to 1999 by a joint team of Belgian and Chinese scientists. Among other dinosaurs and mammals, they found skull bones from 2 velociraptors. They were found in the Bayan Mandahu Formation, which is named after a village nearby of the same name. It wasn't until 2008 that these fragmentary bones got their proper description by Belgian, Canadian, and Chinese scientists. The team found more than enough characteristics of these skull bones to lump them into the Velociraptor genus, but to separate them from the Mongolians as species. Thus, they referred the bones to a new animal, Velociraptor osmulske. The species name honors Halska osmulska, a Polish paleontologist who helped excavate and describe a great many Mongolian dinosaurs and mammals. I'm sure there are more Velociraptor specimens out there left undescribed, or out there waiting to be found. But for now, that concludes the accessible history of discovery of everyone's favorite time thief.
You didn't say the magic word.
Next, we must take a journey inside its Make sure you leave a like and comment on this video, share it around and subscribe. While you're at it, ring the notification bell too if you want to stay in the know with everything Edge. Thanks for watching. Want to help Edge out? Subscribe to the Patreon at any tier you like for a whole smorgasbord of delicious offerings. Many thanks to Thea Svensson, Steve Bradshaw, Staniforth Hopkins, Nattycat, Dinosaur, Arda Bayer, Abby Smith, Henry Brennan, Dana Manchester, Chris Frampton, and Antron. You've all helped to make this channel possible. Thank you, thank you, thank you.